Welcome everyone, it's Neil here from 3D Tutor, back today with a complete guide, and oh boy, get ready to level up your 3D design skills in this exciting speed modeling video. I present you a complete guide to mastering the art of isometric room design in Blender 3. Now this is not your average speed modeling tutorial, it's packed with valuable information and techniques that will take your designs to the next level. If you missed the last video, be sure to check it out. It's the biggest project 3D Tutor has ever done and is available for purchase with a massive discount, which we can only keep up till the end of the month as we have to keep the lights on in the office. You can also pretty much get it for free by joining our Patreon. As always, the links are down below. And that's not all. That project will actually be turned into a full Unreal Engine course set to be released in early February, so I'll keep you updated on that. Now today's video is a sneak peek of the Isometric Room full course, which will be available for pre-order and released this Thursday, along with the complete polished introduction. So if you want to follow along with the complete course, be sure to grab your pre-order today and save yourself a bit of money. So to sum up, today you can grab your pre-order from Gumroad, and on Thursday the course will be released on our other platforms like Udemy, Skillshare and Artstation, etc. Now this course may be shorter than other 3D Tutor courses, but it's packed with tons of valuable information. This speed model video also has screen display keys on, so those of you that have asked for them, here you go. And with these display keys, if you're some kind of Blender Jedi, you'll be able to follow along pretty easily. Plus, if you stick around till the end, you'll learn an amazing compositing technique that will take your final render images to the next level. So that's enough of all that. Let's get started on mastering the art of isometric room design in Blender 3. Cheers everyone. So the first thing you're going to get when you download this course is you're going to get an actual download pack, and within that download pack there's actually going to be a reference guide with all the references that you can use. This is a good idea to teach you how to set up references using PureRev and basically use that then to plan out your actual builds, your rooms and things like that. Next of all, within the course, what we're going to be doing is setting out the floor plan. And this is really important because once you get a nice size for the floor plan, you'll be able to use that in future builds and things like that. I also show you as well how to actually bring in the roofs in a really nice way that makes them very, very level. Next we're doing now is we're setting out the actual rooms. So the actual room needs to have some wooden slats kind of going up it, some dado rails and things like that. And that is here what I'm actually showing you how to do. It's important that when we build a room, we build it in a set way, because setting it out then allows us to not only visualize what we're actually trying to do, but visualize where we can actually put things like beds and furniture and wardrobe. Also, we want to make it so the aesthetics of the room match the actual look that we're actually going for. So for instance, we've got wooden beds, wooden wardrobes. It's quite a young, modern look which we're actually going for. So we don't want anything too sleek in there, for instance. Plus, we kind of actually want it to match up with things like the telescope, the globe. Now what we'll be going through in the course on this part is showing you how to use some basic modifiers, the solidifier for instance, and how to split up the actual parts into separate pieces so that we can actually bring those wooden slats and dado rails forward in a really, really nice and easy way. Again, this is the first part of the course, so we'll be covering the very, very basics of Blender. So even if you're new to Blender or haven't got much experience, you'll easily be able to follow along. You can see that as we now start to progress a little bit more through the course, we start picking up the complexity of the actual modeling. I try and build within my courses a really, really nice learning arc so that we start off at the very basics, and as we work up then to more complex things. I also make sure that in the end you should have the skills to actually go away and create your own, whether that be isometric designs, environments and things like that. Now what we're doing is, as we've laid out our actual room, what we're going to do now is put in things like the window. I always think that that's the next thing we should be approaching, because then it gives a really good visual of what we actually want our room to look like and where we can think about actually placing light. So we're actually really pre-planning everything out. so that when we come and create other rooms or other environments, it's really good to have a really nice concept with the light actually in. So once I brought these windows and things in, then I'll bring in some light. And even though it's pretty much just a box model at the moment, we'll still be able to get a really, really good idea of how to progress going forward. You will notice a lot of the top studios and things, that includes Blizzard or CG Project Red or anything like that. They will actually gray box everything out, bring in some light in, and then they'll have a really, really good idea of where to approach the level or environment that they're trying to achieve. Now what we're putting in is the final window, and this window is actually going to be covered up by a texture which is basically looking out into the sky. So we have two real main features for light in this room. One of them is the round window where the moonlight is coming through, and the other one is of course the central point, which will be the sky, which a little bit later on in the course you'll see how we actually light that up. Now again, all of the textures and everything will come in the download pack, and we'll be using something which is called a atlas. It's a little bit like a trim sheet. It has many textures on one actual UV space. And what we do is we actually take the models and we actually place them where we want them to be in that UV space. I think there's 3 or 4 actual Atlas textures that come with this course. And of course, those Atlas textures are not only the albedo or the color, they also come with the normal maps, the roughness, metallic. This is also great because when you want to come and create your own rooms or environments and things, it's good to know how to use not only seamless textures, atlas maps, UDIMs, and trim sheets. So if you've got a good idea how to use all those, you'll be able to mix and match them depending on what you need. For instance, mobile games may be better off using atlases rather than seamless textures or even UV mapping them out in something, let's say, like Substance Painter. I always like to bring in the first colors that actually set off the whole scene now. So you can see at the moment we've brought in our floor, and now I'm going to bring in the wood, I'm going to bring in the walls, and once I've got that actually down, then I can actually think about what kind of colors I'm going to create my wardrobes, my telescope. Don't be afraid, don't try and stick to something, like the telescope in this is black and white, but you could make it some different colors and you probably would be able to get away with it as long as it matched the aesthetics of the actual room. You can see there as well within the course that we are going to go through not only bringing texture maps into and creating shaders and materials, but also how to change them. We're also going to cover things like how to create glass. It's always a good idea at this point to bring in a floor as well. If you don't bring in a floor, you're not going to have any idea really of how the light is actually going to bounce in the room. So whatever you're building, always bring in a floor. It does make the lighting completely different. Now on this occasion, I've chosen to bring in kind of a dark floor to actually get some really nice roughness off of the actual build itself. And I think that really adds to the overall render. This is a little bit like a 3-point lighting system, so you will learn throughout the course as well how to set up lights, how to change how soft or hard the shadows are, how to bring in moonlight, and how to actually really bring in all that light and get it working together to really make a nice scene. Most of the time when people are creating renders, they have amazing models, but the actual lighting really lets down the overall render. And as I said, with this course, we actually really go in to look at things like compositing, and now we can really make that image pop. So now you can see we're actually lighting up the universe outside, and when we actually take the camera and look where we're actually going to look, you will see that it looks really nice how we've lit it up. Now we've brought in the moonlight, and we've actually, you can see the light bouncing off the floor. It's looking really nice. And now we're ready, after the wood, to move on and start bringing in, the bed, shelves, and all the smaller parts that make up this room. So now what we've done is we started to create the furniture, and some of the first furniture you should create are the kind of larger items. It's much easier then to start with the smaller items once you've got those large items in place. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the wardrobe, and once I've finished the wardrobe, then I'll actually position it and open that door. You can see as well the look that we're actually going for is very kind of simple way of modeling, but it's highly effective. So in something like this, you don't want anything too detailed because it loses its appeal if it is too detailed. You want it to be really simple, nice shapes that if they were put on a silhouette, so just black and white, you would easily be able to recognize what they are. This is all to do with composition, and when you're creating things like this, it's really important that you have a good idea of how things actually should be placed around the room. You can see as well that we have our little guy in there, and we're using him basically to make sure that everything is to scale. It's always a good idea to have things to scale, especially when you're creating things like bed sheets. Because you are using the cloth simulator, the cloth simulator basically works on how large objects are. So it works on physics. So it's always a good idea to keep things to scale. Whenever you're first starting a build like this, make sure that you bring in your own human OBJ just to make sure everything's to scale. That way as well, if you want to take it through to any other software, or if you're working in a studio or anything like that, everyone is going to have kind of the same scale with whatever they're building. There are games out there which use different scales. So for instance, in World of Warcraft, the characters in there are actually probably 8 feet tall or something like that. So everything around them actually has to get scaled to them. So they don't actually use kind of human proportions in that game. But everyone sticks to the same scale because they actually have a human scale which is 8 feet tall basically. You can now really see now how we're making full use of that Atlas texture map, using all of those textures to not only create our furniture, the chalkboard, but you can just see how many textures we've managed to get actually onto that map and how it's really, really effective once you've done that. Just be careful if you're making your own that the normal maps and all the roughness maps and everything like that line up together. You can really change the roughness on certain parts of the map as well if you know how to do that. And you can do this quite easily within software like Substance Paint. A lot of the time as well, I'm not just relying on texture maps. I am creating my own shaders, just simple shaders within Blender for things like glass or plastics, some types of metal. And you'll find it really easy to put together rooms like this once you know kind of the whole kind of system of how to create either textures or materials and shaders. And that is something that you're going to be learning throughout this course. Now, as you can see, we're moving on to a bit more difficult modeling techniques. So we're looking at things like proportional editing. We're looking at things like inserting, edge loop, and things to really manipulate the mesh and get it to go to where we want it to be. You will learn throughout this course really good techniques to increase your workflow significantly. So you kind of get to a point in 3D modeling where you can't actually learn anymore as far as modeling goes. Well, you can, but not as quickly as you was doing before. And what it's about at that point is actually speeding up the process. So speeding up the workflow and finding better ways to do things. Now you can see what I'm doing is I'm creating a pillow. I'm using the actual cloth generator, using the pressure on that, taking the gravity off, and then just expanding that pillow out. And we will be going into things like the particle system, things like the cloth simulator throughout the course. So you can see as well, we're going to use that as well for the actual sheet that drapes across the bed. It's just the easiest way to do it. You can of course go in and sculpt it, but again, it's all about increasing that actual workflow, making it as easy as possible. One of the other things you will be learning throughout this course as well is you'll be learning about the modifiers. We use a lot of modifiers in this course, and we sometimes use a bit of modifier stacking, and that is just to stack a few modifiers on top of each other to actually have different modeling techniques applied to our meshes and things like that. As well as that as well, we'll be going pretty much in depth in how to actually UV unwrap things. So one of the main things that a lot of courses miss out is how to make sure that we're actually applying seams properly or sharps. And you'll learn that throughout the course because we will be unwrapping a lot of the models in here. We need to make sure that these models basically unwrapped correctly, or the actual textures won't actually be applied properly. Things like the wood grain will be going the wrong way. And you can see as well that in the course, we do have some seamless textures and some basic texture maps, which is basically the whole UV space in one texture. So for instance, like the wood one you see now, that is basically a seamless texture. All that basically means is that it's a texture that can be repeated over and over again, and it doesn't actually matter how large you actually make that UV map, it will still keep the same kind of consistency throughout. Now we're on to modeling books. I'm going to show you some great techniques to actually model certain things. So modeling books is something that is in a lot of my courses, and I'll show you a really nice way to make really stylized books really quickly and easily. You'll also learn how to model things quickly, like for instance the telescope or the laptop and things like that. A lot of the time with models in these sorts of things like isometric rooms and things, you're really relying on your actual textures. So it's really important to get some really nice textures in place. Now we're moving on to the lava lamp here, and you can see again just how quick it is to actually model this. So again, you will be learning these techniques, and you'll also be learning really easy ways to actually create the lava, so the lava inside, and how to actually light it as well. We'll be using something called meta balls, which we used in the blacksmith shop. So if you've not seen that, check it out on our YouTube channel, and you see just how effective those things are, what you can do with them, how to make clouds and smoke, for instance, and just a really nice technique. You can also see in this course, there's a lot of new things that have come to Blender 3 Plus, and we're really making good use of them. You won't actually see it in here, but we do also have a part that is all to do with the Blender Asset Manager. So you'll learn how to actually take out these parts and how to have them in your own Blender Asset Manager. So you could literally build up an entire database of all little parts and then just bring them in, and you'll be able to create rooms in no time. This is entirely what the actual modular pack that I showed at the beginning of this video, the 250 piece medieval stylized modular pack, is basically based around that. So within that, you actually get a blend file, which is the asset manager with all those parts in there. And then you can simply just drag and drop them wherever you want them to be and kind of build them together like a Lego. You'll be able to see once we've actually finished marking the seams on all these books, just how easy it is once you've learned all those techniques to mark seams correctly, to make sure they unwrap like presents and things, that we'll be able to apply those textures really nicely and easily. And most of modeling is about preparation when you're dealing with textures anyway. Now you can see again, we're using this atlas map, and this time we're actually creating all these books. So we're just moving them into place. You can also see that on a lot of these actual books, we have actually blurred them out. We've blurred out the actual games, for instance, and because we don't want anything copyrighted or anything. You can kind of make out what they're going to be. But the thing is about these rooms, because they're so small and dinky, you can kind of get away with that. If you were doing something on a larger scale or something where you would be much closer up, you'd probably have to go away and create those textures yourself. This is a really good technique of creating plants and soil, and just using a quick displacement modifier. And then when we come to the plants, the main thing to just take into account is once you've created like the basic stems and things, you can just bring in a few modifiers and really turn them into an actual plant from something that doesn't look really like it's too sharp. I could have also come in as well at this point and used my kind of soil and then a particle system to actually put these leaves in a kind of random place or something. But to be quite honest, it's so kind of small, this plant, that it's probably just easier just to drag them in, spin them round, make them different sizes, and then, as I say, add in a couple of modifiers and then we're done. You can now see how fast this actual plant's coming together, and you can also see now that I'm using proportional editing just to pull those all into place. At the moment it kind of doesn't look like a plant, but as soon as I bring in that subdivision, you can see it's looking much nicer. We also used a little bit of randomness there just to bend those leaves a little bit in different ways. Alright, so next we're moving on then to actually giving the plant some textures, some materials. Now I'm going to actually create the laptop. Luckily for us, with the laptop, a lot of the textures are actually going to do most of the work for us. And with the actual laptop, one of the things we do is we take one of the textures, so the albedo, and we actually plug that into the emission just to get some really nice glow off of the monitor of the actual laptop. Again, with the texture here, all I did is I took a screenshot of, something like the NASA website and basically plonked that into my texture map. The only thing that's important, as I said earlier, with the texture maps is just make sure that you are creating things like roughness, metallic, normal maps, any emission that you might have. That's the main thing that you just need to get right. Now moving on to the actual plugs, and you will be learning throughout this course how to actually use the extra curves menu, which is just an add-on inbuilt within Blender. And you can see we're using curves because it just makes it so easy to create those wires. A little bit later on as well, I'll be using kind of a similar technique to create the chair arms, which you wouldn't have thought you'd actually create chair arms like that, but we actually use it where we can actually use the grease pencil and create those nice curves and flow for that actual chair. I also create two here, and the reason is because I want one to be exactly the same resolution for the other wire, which is actually going to go into the light. You can see using this technique as well, it's really easy to manipulate your wires. It's really easy then to just convert them into mesh. Now I'm moving on to the chalkboard. Really easy, this chalkboard, not a lot to it. Just make sure when you're creating things like this that you're creating it so it's actually looks stable, so the wood looks thick enough. And because we're not actually viewing the back of this, because it is an isometric room and we only want it from one certain position as we're taking the image, then we don't really need to spend a lot of time on things that people aren't going to see. So that's always something that you should take into account. For instance, there's no point creating the inside of buildings if the character is only going to be, running around the outside. And a lot of times in gaming, if you actually went into the inside of the building, it's probably a bit of a mess in there because they know no one's actually going in there. A lot of the time as well, when we're using this texture map, we just make things fit. So we make the UVs actually fit to the texture map. So with the chalkboard, for instance, I didn't need to use all of that board. I just needed to use part of it. Okay, so now we're moving on and just making sure that we're happy with all the colors. Now we've got more things in the room, we can make sure everything's looking right before we actually carry on, because mainly now we've got kind of the smaller actual parts to create. So for instance, with the window now, I can see when I'm looking at it that it looks a little bit too blocky. So the wood is really too thick in comparison to the rest of the build. So I just went in and quickly made it a little bit thinner, and that's something you should do periodically throughout, perhaps 3 or 4 times, just to make it, look correct. Now what we're doing is we're actually creating the rug. So first of all, I'm going to bring in the texture, then I'm going to use a particle system. And it's the great thing about the Blender particle system is for grass and things and all stuff like that, you can actually use the actual texture, and that then the actual particles will inherit the color of the actual texture. So that's why we're actually using it. So you can see now with the rug, it looks like an actual rug, and it's based on that kind of galaxy image. Now I'm just going to create a quick skateboard using pretty much most of the modeling techniques that we've already learned. I don't think there's actually anything new here that we'll be using, but you can see the course actually is based on taking you from the very simple techniques of creating things all the way up then to using more complex things. By kind of you come towards the end of the course, you'll pretty much know how to create most things quickly and easily. They're not high level modeling or anything like that, but you will have the techniques probably nailed down up to this point. It's just a question now at this point in speeding up our workflow, showing you new techniques, showing you more simple key commands rather than going to menus. One of the problems that you do have to be careful of is that when you come into texture skateboards, you just want to make sure that the texture is big enough. That's one of the main things that you just need to take into account when you're creating atlas maps, that the textures are big enough to go on whatever you're trying to texture. You can see there that the texture on the skateboard is perhaps a little bit too low resolution. And if I went in and made that texture, that skateboard texture, perhaps a quarter of the size of the map, then it would look perhaps a little bit better. So just take that into account when you're creating your own textures. So now we're making a start on the telescope. I'm going to be using my reference a lot. I'm not going to make it as complex as what it should be. After all, it is kind of an isometric room. And as I said earlier, you can get away with a lot more, simple shapes and things. It's kind of stylized in a way as well, but not too much. So we could have put a handle, for instance, on the telescope, but I chose not to. I thought it was enough that I already had. It's simple yet effective. So now what I'm doing is I'm just manipulating all of those kind of little intricate parts on the actual telescope just to be the way that I actually want them. And as I said, at this point, you should really understand how to manipulate mesh how to fix mesh if you have problems with it as well, but get it to be exactly the way that you want it. What you're looking for when you're actually modeling is kind of, you don't want anything happening by accident. You want everything to happen because you chose it to happen. I remember in the beginning when I was modeling, there was a lot of happy mistakes where something turned out really nicely and I had no idea really how I actually did it, how I came to that point. And you know, when you've kind of, you know, got the hang of Blender, when that's not happening anymore, and it's more about that you're doing things on purpose. As I said as well, the other thing is whatever you build in, just make sure that everything looks as though it's solid and holding it in place. So don't forget where are orientations, you know, on a model. So the easiest way to look at this is look at any characters, and if they're like kind of overbalanced, you will see it straight away. Your eyes will pick up that straight away. So if the legs are too far back on an animal, you will understand that the belly will drop down to the floor, and you'll see this without even thinking about it. So it's really important that you understand if an object is actually balanced. So you can see on this telescope, for instance, I'm using references, but I'm also thinking about, right, where would this be actually balanced from? Would this be strong enough to hold up this telescope, for instance? And you can see I've gone probably as thin as I can go with those metal bars that are holding up the telescope. And I've got to really compensate for that by making the actual stand probably a little bit thicker, as you can see. The legs are really big and chunky, but it does give the illusion that this would be able to hold up this pretty heavy telescope. If I had gone a little bit thinner or I'd made those legs a bit thinner, it just wouldn't look right. But as you can see, as it looks now, it looks really nice. So last of all then, we just need to make a new shader, which will just be a simple glass shader. As you can see, I made it a little bit green, just so it looked different from the glass. The thing is, you wouldn't probably be able to see the glass anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. But what I do want to do is make sure it's the right shader, you know, to put it in my asset manager and then maybe use it in other scenes that I'm creating. It's really, really great, you know, once you can come to build anything isometric and just bring in any kind of, you know, assets that you've already created. All right, so now I think we're moving on. Oh yeah, we're moving on to the stool, which I wanted to make, you know, kind of a little bit sci-fi. So just a simple stool, using the bevel, and mainly just using emission as a shader there, just to make it glow a little bit. I think it's the only kind of sleek sci-fi looking thing in the room actually, so yeah. Simple poster now. Could have made this canvas. With a simple poster, I'm just going to pull it out. You can see there I put it onto sharp with proportional editing. That gives you the best result actually when you're pulling something out. Like a poster, just looking as though it's just bent off of the wall a little bit. Just adding that little bit extra touches to things really makes a big difference in the overall design. So now I'm onto the actual lamp. Just making sure it's the right size first of all. And then just creating a simple lamp. And I do want a bulb in the end, you know, in the end of this lamp, because I might actually be, you know, I will be using that with a point light or a spotlight. I think we used on this one. So again, using the curves, making sure the resolution is quite low. We don't need it too high. And then again, with proportional editing, as you can see, really, really easy to actually create the shape that we're looking for. And finally, the bulb then. Okay, with the lamp finished then, I'm looking at what's left. And pretty much we've got the rocket ship left. And we've got the chair, I think. I think that's all that's left. So rocket, again, we could have spent a whole course actually creating this rocket. We could make it very, very intricate. But because it's just a model and a toy, and it's also very small in comparison to the rest of the room, I'm mainly focusing on the main parts of this. So I want to make sure that I've got those kind of boosters in at the back. I want to make sure I've got the wings and the tail on this. And then again, I'll let the textures do most of the work. The other thing is when you're creating things like this, the textures, you want them to be easily recognizable. You don't want people to be thinking about what this is. So So just make sure that you pick well-known kind of logos and things if you're going to be using some logos. You can see that I've pulled that up and I think I got it misshapen. I think it's out of line. So with something like that, you could just pull it back into place, or you could just start again because it was an easy part to do. I always recommend probably starting something again rather than trying to fix things, especially when you're just starting out and learning. All right, just finishing those boosters now and a quick mirror modifier just to bring it over. And now I'm pretty much finished with that. And I just need to make the base. And again, using my reference just to create this base. And again, I'll be adding the logo on the front of this. Probably can't see much of the logo again from the render, but you will be able to just make out a tiny thing which will be quite recognizable to your eyes. So that's the reason why I'm pouring that in there. I could probably get away without that, but as I say, the little, kind of intricate details really do add to the overall feel of the actual room. Okay, so now we're moving on to the last object in the room, which is the chair. You can see here I bring in a plane, I bring in a curve, I delete the curve while in edit mode, and then that enables me to draw on this plane now and just get a very rough kind of shape of what I'm going for. I need to make sure that my guy's going to be able to sit on it, he's going to be comfortable on it, and his legs are going to fit it as well. So all those things I'm taking into account. Now you can see at the moment, really sharp on the edges. I want to make sure they're nowhere near as sharp as that. And all I'm doing is manipulating those handles on the curve to get that really nice curve that I'm actually looking for. You can press Alt S as well on the ends of the actual curves, and that then brings them in. So it's a nice kind of point. Thinner, at the ends as what they are around the rest of it. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually adding in my own edge loops here just to kind of bring those out a little bit. The curve didn't do everything for me, so I'm actually just fixing those bits. And then once I'm happy with that now, I can actually bring another part over for the other side, and then I can start with the actual seat where the guy's going to be sat on. Bevel the edges off slightly, as you can see. Just measuring it out now, making sure it fits in there nice and comfortable. And then what I'll do is I'll bring in this plane, bend it the way I want it, give it solidify, and then finally add in a subdivision surface. And you can see it turns out really nice, and it's a really quick way and technique of creating a chair. Adding in now those wooden slats, just making sure that it's supported well. Again, as I said, make sure everything's supported really nicely. Now, I'm kind of hoping as well that is not just leather, and it's actually got some wood or metal underneath it, because if not, it's going to be sinking into the floor there. But a lot of chairs are like that, so your brain fills that in. So yeah, it looks correct. All right, so let's bring in the leather material. Not sure if I actually had one. So I was looking on the map to see if I actually had a leather. I think I actually went in and made my own in the end. Not actually sure. But leather's quite easy to create anyway. Yeah, I didn't like it, so you can see there. I just created my own material using the velvet shader. That just made it easy. And now we've got everything in. I'm just placing everything in its right place. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this wire then, plug it into my lamp. And you can see it did make it easy because I already had it there. I don't have to create a new one or worry about the size or anything like that. And now I'm just bringing in a point light. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I change it to an actual spotlight. I think we use a point light and a spotlight on this. So one will just be illuminating kind of where the bulb is. And then the spotlight will be kind of touching the floor. Next of all, I bring in a cube. And this cube is going to bring in some volumetrics. And I only want volumetrics really around where the actual lamp is. And you can see what it does. It just adds that little bit of kind of haziness around there. Really adds to the scene. Just making sure all the options are on now in case I want to render it in Eevee. And the other thing I'm also doing there is I'm looking at my ambient occlusion. So now you can see we've got our first render out. You can see the ambient occlusion is not there yet. You can see that volumetrics is working really well. Now, the one thing you can see when it's rendered out is the ambient occlusion will come in as very noisy because Blender doesn't automatically denoise that. It only denoises the main image. So what I've done now is I brought in a denoiser in the compositor, and now we have a really nice ambient occlusion and a really nice main image. And then I'm just going to overlay my main image over the top of the ambient occlusion. And you can see there what a difference that makes. It's really probably one of the biggest differences you can make. So if you're doing this, again, you'll learn in the course how to put all this together, how to bring in glare, and what it takes is a really kind of basic image and make it into an image where you really don't have to do that much to put it out on your portfolio or anything like that. And now I'm just going through and showing you what this actual glare does. Now, the thing is with the compositor, it's always the tiny things that make the most difference, maybe except the ambient occlusion. So you can see now, I've put that glare aside because it does cost a lot in performance. So you want to put it aside while you work on the rest of the room. And now I'm going through and bringing in things like sharpness, anti-aliasing, different colors, and also I'm changing the warmth of the room to what I actually want it. So within this course, you will learn pretty much how to change everything. So you might want something which is a really cold place and a lot of ice and things like that. You can do this all in the compositing. You could do something like a hearth in an inn and you want it really warm feeling to it. Again, we can do all this in the compositor. So now I'm looking at what things I need to fix. I always do this. Basically, as I said, you'll learn about this in the course. We do a very low kind of sample render, and then we come to a mid sample and then a high sample. And by that high one, you should have a really nice image. And all these skills, again, you'll be able to use in all of your isometric designs going forward. It's pretty much the complete guide on how to create these rooms without anything really missed out. Apart from a little bit probably of basic animation or something, that's the only thing that's not included in this course. Alright, and that's the final result. I hope you really enjoyed that, everyone. As I say, all the links will be down below. Don't forget to pre-order if you want to get your hands on this. It will be out on Thursday. Thank you so much to all the patrons that support the channel. And again, if you want to become a patron and get most of these things for free, then check out the links down below. Alright everyone, so I'll see you on the next one. Happy modeling. Bye bye.